This podcast provides a platform to discuss important questions and complex issues, challenge the status quo, and confront the boundaries of the establishment. I'm retired Police Chief Daniel Hahn. I went from being arrested at 16 to serving over 34 years in law enforcement. My goal is to keep you informed with news not being reported, voices not being heard, and the untold history of how we got here so that we can create a way forward. All right, today on A Way Forward, we have Marlon Marrache, and I want to introduce you a little bit to his background. Marlon is currently a lieutenant at the California State University, Dominguez Hills, but his history is much longer than that. He's a 24-year veteran, retired now from Los Angeles Police Department with 12 years in the Police Misconduct Investigation Division, where he did adjudication and examination experiences, basically internal affairs in a you could say a prosecutorial role, representing the chief of police in front of and conducting a board of rights. Marlon has been assigned to also, on the other side of things, to represent officers in the officer representation section, defending and representing the rank and file in what in law enforcement we call Skelly hearings, or part of the appeals process that officers go through. Marlon also teaches students that need to learn about conduct and internal affairs, complaint investigations, but having the lens from both sides, from defending officers to investigating officers, which is extremely unique, not only to law enforcement, but also LAPD's process is a little unique also. He has a passion that came early in his career when he was preparing cases for court-martials and non-judiciary punishment, otherwise known as Captain Mass, when he was on active duty in the U.S. Navy. He has a Juris Doctorate and was, I guess, pursuing being an attorney until promotions came along and life happened, right?
Yes. It's something that was well thought out with the family, and it's just an offer I couldn't refuse.
Yeah. A lot of work, law school. More power to you.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Chief.
So I wanted to first talk about your kind of growing up, because I think you have a really unique story and how you, from where you started as a child to be getting into law enforcement to where you're at now. So I believe you were born and raised, at least to a certain age, in Peru. Tell us about growing up in Peru and what made you come to Los Angeles.
Let's take a trip down memory lane.
Oh, wait, and I want to stop you before you even get there. I heard you on another broadcast. I think it was, you said you saw your first football game was the Super Bowl between the Eagles and the Raiders.
Yes.
Now, I watched that, and I have to make sure we got this right, because I'm part of the Raider Nation. So the Raiders won that game.
Yes, they did.
Jim Plunkett was the winning quarterback.
Yes, he was.
Ron Jaworski was the losing quarterback. And I won some money on that game in middle school as the Raiders whooped up on the Philadelphia Eagles as we were the underdogs.
That would be true. And I got to tell you something is, when I came here from Peru and I'm watching American football to us is football, right?
Right.
And so I'm watching this game, and actually the first time I even watched this particular sport was Dan Pastorini actually getting the ball and just giving it to Earl Campbell. And I'm looking at this guy, and I'm just like, what is this guy doing? He's just running through everyone. And I believe in that particular game.
You can get jaded if that's the first time you saw football as Earl
Very
Campbell.
jaded.
Everybody else is going to pale in comparison.
I think he ran for like 235 yards, and I'm like, this game is incredible. And so that's, I got to tell you, without Dan Patrick in my life at 6 a.m, I'm just a sports junkie. So yes, I'm glad we got it right.
Yeah. So anyway, Peru. What was your experience in Peru, and how did you get to LA?
Peru was a blessing, and I say that being a son of a Navy father. My mom and dad divorced very early, so I don't really have a lot of recollection of my mom and dad being together. But the plan was for my mom to start a new life here in the United States, in Los Angeles, and to stay home with my father. And so being home, more like my grandmother, which I come to realize is that a lot of kids here, not so much in LA, but I'm sure throughout the nation, but I can speak for California or in LA, is that they're raised by their grandmothers a lot. You know, my grandmother raised me, my brother, and my sister, and life was great. All I had to do was just play soccer. Football to me was just a passion. I'm a true believer that if I would have stayed home, I would have either been a pro soccer player or I would have been in the Naval Academy for the Peruvian Navy. Life was great up until 12 years old. That's when Dad pretty much said, hey, listen, you guys either stay here or you go home with your mom. So what's it going to be? Of course, a kid given a choice to go to the States. I mean, my brother and I, we just said, you know what? We got to go. And so we did. And that's when we ended up.
What was that transition like? Because I know when we talked before, you had some challenges as a kid when you first came here from another place and with different culture and all that.
Yes.
What was that transition like? As you know, a lot of people move to new communities and immigrate to this country.
So in part of the journey, we were here, I want to say, for about 1.5 years. And now I'm taking you back to probably 1977, which, by the way, I fell in love with the New York Yankees. I think that particular year, the Yankees and the Dodgers won the World Series, 77 and 78.
Safe in LA to be a Yankees fan.
Well, I suppose at the time, no one really paid attention because I'm just this new kid going, what the hell is this sport all about? And so I actually met a neighbor, blonde kid, who was throwing a tennis ball up against the wall with this mitt. And I'm just wondering, I'm going, what is this guy doing? Mm-hmm. And sure enough, don't ask how we actually were able to communicate, obviously implied, because I didn't know any English and he didn't know any Spanish.
You didn't know English?
I didn't know English when I was here in 77, but somehow I picked it up. And he figured out that I was left-handed. He gave me a left-handed mitt. We lived across the street from the park. And next thing you know, I'm just in love with this game. And so in 77, 78, I got a taste of being here. But then again, I was only like about 9, maybe 10 years old. So it wasn't really sports. If I played sports, I was okay. Mm-hmm. When it really hit is when I came here permanently in December of 1980. So when I was in December of 1980, I was 11 years old. I had a red shirt 1 month to become 12 years old and go into 7th grade. And let me tell you, man, that was, Chief, that was hard. It was hard.
Still little English?
I knew enough, yes. Mm-hmm. I think I picked it up pretty fast. I had a good base, a good foundation. I didn't have I suppose my verbal acuity wasn't at a high level, mm-hmm. but it was fair. Mm-hmm. And so when I get there to junior high school in 7th grade, no one would talk to me. Nobody wanted to talk to me because I started realizing that you got to fit in. One of the ways to fit in, I know we talked about this, is that I didn't have a pair of Vans. I didn't have a pair of Vans. If you didn't wear like OP shorts or, a lightning bolt shirt and didn't fit in, people just wouldn't talk to me at all. And so I had to bug my mom, like, Mom, you got to get me a pair of Vans. And lo and behold, when I first got my pair of Vans,
people started talking to you.
People started talking to me. They got to know me a little bit. The charisma kicked in, the character kicked in, and life was good. 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, back in our days, is what it was. And then I went into high school. So that particular era was very special because people did open up their arms. And I did get into like these classes in junior high school, the drama class. I had a teacher who everybody wanted to get in this class because it was a very popular elective to do. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily elective, but it was just very popular to be in there. And once I got into this class, little by little, everybody started getting to be friendly. But I suppose it's bullying, what we used to call it, where I was messed around with. I was called certain names, not to the extent of what we go through today.
Because you were from...
I was from Peru. I didn't speak that much English. My junior high school just started a magnet program. In my neighborhood, I want to say not many Latinos, not many blacks. It was predominantly pretty white. My junior high school, it started blending in. So now I'm taking you to mid-'80s, early 80s to mid-'80s.
This is in L.A.?
This is in L.A. in the San Fernando Valley in the 818.
Okay. And did soccer continue for you?
I started playing AYSO. I said, no. I said, I don't want to do this because I just had this, I had this passion for playing baseball. So my neighbor, Bart, to this very day, taught me how to play baseball, taught me to play flag football, and taught me how to play basketball. And when I came here, you know what?
Those are the 3 big ones.
Yeah, those are the 3 big ones. And you know what? I'm going to stick to these. And That's all I ever wanted to do. I wanted to be the next Louisiana Lightning, which not many people know is Gator, which is Ron Guidry from the New York Yankees. I was left-handed. I thought I was this awesome pitcher. I played Little League and just fell in love with all these sports, but soccer was, put aside.
Yeah, soccer wasn't. It's getting bigger now in this country, but
now
back
forever
then,
is great.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
God bless the dynamics and the, I suppose, the partnerships with the Major League Soccer, with the MLS. It's been in existence since '96. That would be 30 years.
Yeah.
30 plus years.
Sacramento, we've been trying to get a team forever.
Yes. So. You just got to drive over to San Jose, which I'm pretty sure you don't want to do.
It takes a ways now. Traffic is hell. So after school, you went into the military. What made you go into that? And then also in the military, you got into this whole kind of reviewing conduct kind of thing that has kind of been a theme of your professional career.
Right. So what I will say is, me, along with many that I've had in my life, my closest friends, and if you see the lens of many kids, when you do have an absent father, which I did, you have a lot of neglect and abandonment. I'm a true believer that at some point you do experience, no matter what your background is, some neglect and some abandonment. All I wanted to do was play sports. I hated books. I didn't want to go to high school. Was not for me. I dropped out of high school. And one of the reasons why I dropped out of high school is because my mom at the time was working like 3 jobs, and I just got sick and tired of asking her for money.
Dropped out of high school, now have a Juris Doctorate.
Yeah, there you go. That's the journey. I just didn't. At the time, I started learning how to surf, and all I wanted to do was surf, work, have money, buy clothes, and go to clubs and just hang out.
You truly became a Californian.
Yeah, I was all California. That's all I wanted to do, and so at some point, from the ages of 17, 18, all the way to 24 years old, I had to do something. And so that's when one of my best friends started talking about, hey, I think I want to do this, be a police officer. But at the time, because I had such close ties with my father in the Navy, I said, you know what? I got to go make something out of myself. I'm almost 25 years old. And something happens at 25 for men.
Oh, so you're 25 when you joined
I'm
the military.
24, 25. I'm a late bloomer.
So speaking of law enforcement, let's go back a little bit. What was in Peru? What was the relationship with law enforcement and the community? Because in a lot of countries, there's a rough relationship between law enforcement. So in Peru, I know you were fairly young, but how was law enforcement looked upon from the community in Peru?
Well, I can speak for Peru and probably the entire South America. Being young, I didn't get to experience, just like you said, or have that vision. But I can tell you, of course, it's not even, I suppose it's not even respected. 1, 2, a lot of bribery, right?
So corrupt.
Of course, very corrupt. Very corrupt to the point where, you know what? Hey, you do something for me, I'll do something for you, the status quo. And, luckily me, being a son of the Navy, we live well. So, we never really got to experience any of those issues, especially with law enforcement.
Yeah. So you joined the Navy. How'd you get involved in the kind of reviewing of conduct type of stuff?
In the Navy, there was a point after 1 year where you have to, what they call, strike for your rate. Basically, you got to find yourself a specialty. And so I went in as an apprentice, as an airman. So my job was just to work on these. I got to an aircraft carrier, and my job was just to chalk and chain planes. And at some point, I wanted to go to the flight deck and be a director. Mm-hmm. Really, really cool bitchin' job. But somehow, some way, I got dragged into legal. I just had a taste for that. And so I did like a loan for like 2 months into the legal office. And here I am just preparing cases for the captain. And you got everybody's dirty laundry. I mean, in my aircraft carrier, out of 5,000, we were the hub. You knew everybody's dirty laundry.
So your responsibility was the ship that you were on?
Yes.
And so, what would you do? What was your responsibility?
My boss would say, hey, you know what? These, we're at Portside in Australia, and they went UA, unauthorized absence. They're supposed to come back at a certain time, and they're like, we ain't coming back. Mm-hmm. And so they take off. So, you get written up. And you get written up. So out of 5,000, you can imagine we had a nice pretty good caseload. As a matter of fact, in one of my tours, in my Westpac tour, we were in Australia, and there was the victim's mother who came to the actual pier side, walked up to the brow and said, "My daughter was raped by 3 of your sailors, and she's only 16 years old, and she knows who they are." And so
that was one of your
next
cases.
thing you know, they name all 3. The admiral pretty much said, "You guys are staying here. We're leaving. Let the Australian courts handle it." And the outcome was, I believe they got acquitted. But yeah, that's the kind of stuff
you would
that
be
we
in charge
dealt with.
of conducting those investigations,
Right.
or
So
reviewing
what?
them,
Well, any criminal, anything that involves discipline, anything that involves any criminal allegations, administrative allegations, my office, my lieutenant, my bosses, my first class petty officer, we all had to work these cases and prepare them, for a possible trial or any settlement. So
did you do that pretty much until you got out of the military?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was my last 2 years, and that was it.
So when you get out of the military, at some point you join LAPD. I think that's the first the department you joined.
Yes.
How did that happen? Right, you come from a country where law enforcement's not real respected. You come here, you speak very little English. You join the Navy, and then somehow you become a police officer in one of the largest police departments in the country.
My best friend was very influential, just like any of your friends would be, right? He was in the academy, and he pretty much told me, "Hey, Marlon, you know what? This is
Were you in
gig."
the military still?
I was still in the military. I
Okay.
was about a year out
Okay.
from being discharged. And he told me, "This is it. I love this stuff." And of course, I take full trust to my friend because we did everything together.
Right.
I mean, you're talking, we surfed together, we worked out together, we partied together. Everything we did, we were just very compatible. And so I will be honest, is that I was concerned. There was a lot of concerns. I suppose fear, in a sense that, do I really want to carry a gun?
Because you didn't grow up thinking you wanted to be a police officer.
No.
Right?
And I just got done watching the Rodney King trial.
Right.
So I'm just like, I don't know if I want to do this.
Probably a lot of people were thinking, I don't know if I want to be a police officer.
One, two, and then the Diallo shooting over in New York, where the kid walks up and
right.
officers have all these guns pointed at him, and he pulls out a wallet,
right,
and they just blast him. And I believe Bruce Springsteen made a song, 42 Shots.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes. He actually wrote a song about that. Anyhow, I had my concerns, and I always told myself, do I really want to live with such a controversy if I'm ever even involved in something like that?
Right.
But when I went to go take the test, Chief, you know what? Something just happened. I was like, you know what? I'm pumped. So all my fears and my concerns turned into motivation, and I just dedicated, and I wanted to do this. And here we are 6 months later, and I get an appointment to the Los Angeles Police Department Academy.
What's your family think? Because, your family came up in Peru, right? And
yes.
They probably had some experiences as adults that you didn't have.
Right. My brother did. My brother had a couple of run-ins with the police, for sure. He didn't say really much. My sister was very supportive. My mom never really voiced her opinion about the police, besides the fact that she just was probably very happy that her son at 30 years old actually made something of himself.
Doing something.
Was a professional.
Because, nowadays I'll talk to people who their family are disowning them if they join law enforcement.
You know what, Chief? Interesting you say that. I've had a couple of situations where I'm doing backgrounds on a particular individual to hire. And one of the reasons, well, let me back up. There's been situations, and this is true, where they're on probation, they're in their probationary period at a particular agency, and there's a lot of demand, and it's very high speed. And they go home, especially if you live at home and you're young with mom and dad. Mom and dad today are telling you, son, I don't want you to go through this. I'm afraid that you're going to get shot because I see this all over social media. So that is it's a true, actual thing that happens now that certainly didn't happen back in our days.
Right.
So my mom was just like, hey, so happy my son, he's graduating.
Check. He might be able to live on his own.
She went to her graduation. She went to my graduation just ecstatic, my mom, and she went to my badge ceremony for when I promoted to sergeant, and then we did it again when I just promoted to lieutenant, and she's just ecstatic. She was just happy.
Good.
Good question, because I've never really actually had a conversation where we actually asked her, "Hey, Mom, what do you think about this
Yeah.
profession?"
Well, I see people now, especially in the Black community, where I think all parents are probably a little concerned about people's safety. But a lot of times in the Black community, what I see now is because of their disdain for law enforcement, they literally will disown their children if they join law enforcement because of their beliefs about law enforcement.
Absolutely.
And so if you're going to join law enforcement, then you're no longer in my family, which, that's a tough decision for somebody to make. You're going to lose nobody wants to lose their family.
No.
So it adds an extra level of pressure on some of these young
Absolutely.
guys and girls that are trying to, chase what they want to do. So, what did you do early on in LAPD? Like I say, that's one of the largest law enforcement agencies.
What we used to
in
call
the country.
what we used to call it, hooking and booking. Here,
Uh-huh.
here I was. I actually had a map, and my first couple of days was like, "Here's my FTO, my training officer. Okay, we're going to this radio call. Tell me where to go, because tell me what to do. Okay, trying to figure out where to actually get you. So it was a lot of, I would say, fun in the sense that you're sharing something very special. What happens in that, in that police vehicle with your partners and your training officer. But for me, it was very, very rewarding, very, very unselfish. And I'll give you an example of that is I had situations early in my career when I was working patrol where all I kept thinking it was about what time do I want to get off and just go hang out with the boys, work out, and go to a club.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had situations where I had this particular radio call where I had a lady, and I won't take you through the whole thing besides the fact that she was lost. She had dementia. She was wearing long sleeves, and she came out of her house, made 2 turns, and she was
Didn't know
lost.
where she was at. Yeah.
And it was time for me to get off. And the whole time when we got, and she spoke Spanish, ¿Cómo estás? Señora, no te preocupes. I was there to support her. But the whole time I'm thinking, Chief, is, you know what? I want to get off.
Get rid of her.
I want to get to work. We went to like 3 different convalescence homes, brought out the manager. Hey, do you know her? They're like, nope. And while we're driving back to the station, I see in the rearview mirror, and she's just crying and just in such distraught. And I'm thinking to myself, this is, and here I am thinking about me.
Yeah.
And so we get back to the station. She starts hyperventilating, having anxiety. We had to call the RA, to calm her down. The whole time I'm sitting next to her and in Spanish, Señora, no te preocupes, everything is going to be okay. And she's just holding on to me. And lo and behold, the reason why I brought up the clothing is because she had a bracelet.
Underneath her sleeve.
Underneath it says, if lost, call this number. At the same time that I was calling this number, a pastor and her husband came to the front desk
looking for her.
And when they reunited, Chief, I got to tell you, man, I was just like, this is it. This is the reasons why I signed up for this. And of course, in the end, she comes to me, gives this big hug, crying, saying, "Mijo, gracias. Thank you for being there for me," in Spanish. And I bring that up to say that those are the situations, and that's what you sign up for, that not many people to this very day, and I'm taking you back 25 years ago, that doesn't really get that spotlight. Not to say that you need the spotlight.
Right.
It's just that because of certain events that have happened
Sure.
Lately, right, in the last couple of years, it's just overshadowed. And we shouldn't forget the reasons why you came on. So for me personally, it made me very unselfish. It made me a better person. I can tell you that, as working as a police officer, a better father to my daughter. And patrol was fun. I did it for a couple of years, but I wanted to expand. I wanted to, I'm not very, I'm a little impatient. What I mean by that is I like to learn things very quickly. And LAPD has afforded me success with a lot of assignments. So somewhere in that tour of my assignments, I ended up with discipline, especially when I promoted to sergeant.
So I can tell you, working in law enforcement for 34 years, I always term like internal affairs or those kind of assignments, like almost like when you're thinking of your own self and what assignments you're going to do, not something you want to do, but kind of something you need to do to be able to learn process if you want to promote and you want to do things in the department. So how is it that you got there? Did somebody call you, or were you seeking that out to expand your knowledge of the whole law enforcement profession, or like what got you into that line of work? Because it's not like, it's not like SWAT or stuff where people are like, yeah, I want to go to IA.
It's not sexy at all whatsoever. I was a sergeant with 2 years on. I was working in a community program in South LA for South Bureau, and my commander, my mentor, was on his way out. And so that's when I started getting the bug to what is it that I want to do next. Mm-hmm. And I met a friend. I had a friend that I met, my boss at the time, who said, hey, we'll bring you on loan to work officer rep section. And so once I got there.
And that is representing the officers?
That's
when
representing
they go
officers. So the LAPD has a section, about 10 sergeants. I should say 10. It's a 10-man unit. Some were police officers, but for the most part, we're all sergeants. And your sole job is to represent officers when they have any type of misconduct. But their primary duty is, and this is what happens with the LAPD, is when there is an OIS, a critical incident, an officer-involved shooting, or in-custody death, or something along the critical incidents, the LAPD has a group of investigators from internal affairs that rolls out. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, ORS personnel roll out because the attorney only represents the shooting officer in the case of an OIS. Well, guess who's got to do all the other compelled interviews? We do. So we have to prep. And the thing about LAPD is that they like to throw a net very wide. Mm-hmm. So, for example, you and I are working, you're the shooting officer, I'm your partner officer. Well, LAPD also there's probably going to be an airship. So we have to find out what they saw, right? Mm-hmm. The tactical flight officer and the pilot. What about the secondary unit? Well, we got to ask them, well, who else was there? Who saw, who heard and saw? And what about the sergeant that got there? Command and control.
And your role was to represent the officers.
All the
officers.
Yes.
So kind of an adversarial system like the courts, where you have a DA and a public defender or whatever. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
So we worked very good.
So that was your first intro into this line of field, is on the officer side.
Yes.
Okay.
And then I had officers who were skellied. They were brought up on alleged misconduct, where the department said, you neglect the duty, you failed to do this and that on 2 allegations, and it's sustained, and we're going to offer you a paper penalty, an official reprimand. Mm-hmm. And of course, the officer's sitting there reading and going, and that's not what I did. They got it wrong. They, meaning IA, has it wrong. Mm-hmm. So they would call ORS and they would say, hey, Sarge, you know what? I didn't do this. So what I would do is to say, okay, I need you to read this entire investigation from beginning to end, A to Z, soup to nuts, with a fine-tooth comb. And then you got to ask yourself, if you didn't do what the department is alleging that you did, because they're saying this happened. Mm-hmm. If the answer to the question is no, then come see me and we'll do an appeal. But if the answer is yes, then there's not much that I can do for you. Well, I come to find out that a lot of people were calling because, unfortunately, what I've realized now as you sit here today before you is that these investigations, they don't really do what they're supposed to do, meaning in my motto, what I talk about is no stone goes unturned. In other words, you're kind of lazy and you kind of cut corners.
Once I think I have you.
Yeah. Or you're just, really, I got to investigate someone for, discourtesy, and you just do a half-baked job. Mm-hmm. And I've realized is that that's not what you're supposed to do. What you should be doing is doing everything in your power to exonerate that officer. If the department's saying, look, you were there and you did this and that, and you follow policy and procedure, then, but for you to get there, you have to be very methodical, very detailed, do a lot of diligence. And unfortunately, as this big machine of the LAPD, our disciplinary system, sometimes you just don't care.
Right.
And so who benefits?
Right. And so internal to LAPD, amongst your peers, that work is probably a lot more favorable in your peers' eyes than the internal affairs side. So at some point you went from that side to the internal affairs. What precipitated that? What caused that?
I had an admin appeal of an officer who was brought up on 2 allegations of misconduct, and the allegations were sustained. He got skellied, and we went to a hearing. We actually went through
And for those who don't know, Skelly is like an appeal, your first step at appeals of what you get accused
Dr.
of.
Skelly it's a famous landmark case. Basically, when you get brought up on these charges of misconduct, you have to be served and, given the opportunity to respond and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
And so this officer, we went to a hearing where we had one hearing officer. You had internal affairs, a sergeant representing, and then myself, and the appellant, I suppose. And so we got it overturned completely. Now, mind you, the hearing officer at the time is a sworn command staff officer. And just because he says, you know what, you got it wrong, I'm going to rule in favor of the defense. Okay, cool. But he still has to go to the chief because it's not binding.
Mm.
He still has to go to the chief and say, hey, chief, they got it wrong. Now, I'm proud to say that in the 7 years that Chief Bratton was chief, he only turned 3 admin appeals, and I was one of them. And so the lieutenant from Internal Affairs, who knew me from a past assignment, say, hey, Marlon, man, you were polite, you were good, you were respectful. I got a spot for you here as a Sergeant 2, so it's an upgrade. It's like a promotion. I went from Sergeant 1 to Sergeant 2 here in the advocate section. Your sole job is to do these appeals and border rights hearings. I could use you, man. On the other side. On the other side, he goes, come to the dark side. So I thought about it. So then my first phone calls was my colleagues over in RS.
I was going to ask you, how'd that go over?
Oh, man, I had this one colleague of mine who spent 20 plus years hating the department. And I tried even my union attorney, the legal counsel, when I first called him, I'm like, man, what am I going to say? And believe it or not, the attorney from legal counsel, general counsel, he said, you know what? That's one of the best decisions you made. One, because not many people make the transition. I've been here over 30 years, and I haven't seen that one do this. 2, you're going to learn moot court, especially that you want to go to law school. You're about to learn trial advocacy, so it's going to be a great experience for you.
Yeah.
Good luck. And then my other guy that I was afraid to call, he says, you know what? Congratulations. I think you're going to be great. So all my fears are thinking he's going to be like, man, you're a sellout.
Right.
It didn't. He actually encouraged me. And so when I went there, that's when it all hit, Chief. That's when I started realizing that we spend so much time and effort in situations or in incidents of our subordinates that really don't deserve to go through this whole process. And I say that from an emotional component, because once you're telling an officer that your career is on the line, I'm sending you, the chief is saying, look, these allegations are so serious, I'm going to direct you to this hearing. This hearing's got a 3-panel member. At the time, it's 2 command staff officers and 1 civilian. They're normally an attorney. That's picked by the police commission. Mm-hmm. And so you're going to go there, and they're going to determine your fate. It's going to be like a trial, but this is what I'm recommending. So it's kind of funky. As a matter of fact, this border rights hearing process was adopted by the United States Navy. We used to be called the Border Inquiry back in the 60s. I suppose Chief... was it Parker? I believe it was Parker, who was a lieutenant, who went to law school, who was a lieutenant in the Navy, that actually saw this whole process and said, you know what? I got to bring this to my agency. Because at the time, as you remember, in the 60s, LA Confidential, I mean, you want to talk about a corrupt department.
Right.
LAPD was horrible back in the 60s and the 70s. And so that was the birth of this border rights process hearing, which is completely different. To this very day, I haven't gotten a call or an email telling me otherwise that there's another agency in the United States.
What you've described of how you have sergeants representing officers, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah, I've never heard of such a thing.
No.
Like our union would do that. And they would be officers, but they're union board members that would come and rep them.
Majority of agencies, if you have false statements or misleading statements or, perjury, fraud, any of those serious allegations, chief's going to call you in and say, look, you're a good dude and all, but guess what? I got to fire you. Mm-hmm. And you're terminated, and you have to go through civil service and appeals for you to get your job back.
Yep.
And this particular stage, right, this platform, if you will, is I'm not going to fire you just yet. I'm going to pay you for 30 days while you await this hearing.
Mm-hmm.
Once this hearing is done and they make their decision, there's two things that I can do. I can't up the penalty depending on their recommendation, but I can certainly lower it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was my job. My sole job was to do these hearings. And I got to tell you, after doing, God, I must have prepared for at least 40 in 3 years. I've done 30 plus of these. And it just, out of the 30 plus border rights that I have conducted, 5 were righteous terminations, removals. In other words, you're a liar, you're a bad actor, you don't belong here.
Right.
In other words, we got it right.
Right.
But since I retired and I've been going around talking about this particular topic, I've always asked myself and say, well, Marlon, what about those other 25?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we should be having this conversation. And so what happened to those 25? And I can tell you just from conducting these, you got a lot of these command staff officers around these as a panel members are looking at me like, hey, Marlon, do you guys think about settling this or like doing, why don't you just give them like suspension or something like that? Because I just got done spending 4 or 5 days to listen to all this to do what? I mean, I'm not going to fire the guy for just, and I always say this, which is true. For the most part, if you do something on duty, the department's pretty flexible because you and I both know not everything is textbook. Right. Cops make mistakes. Some are human. Some are malicious. It just depends.
Right.
But to go through all this and put that officer, the minute you find out that you're being directed to a board, I can tell you right now, man, the family life, the personal life, it starts going down the drain. You don't work. You're having issues at home.
Right.
You're not getting paid. I mean, you can imagine.
So what do you think about, like earlier you mentioned that part of the role is to exonerate or to investigate it to the point where you can exonerate officers. But, there's segments of the community that think, screw that, right? Like these are police officers with a gun and all this power that they have. I don't want the police department exonerating officers. I want the police department holding these people accountable and getting rid of all these bad actors. Because quite frankly, if you think back to the protests or even things that don't rise to protests, just this level of mistrust and this lack of legitimacy in any given agency in the community. I think a big part of that is not the actual act that an officer does or doesn't do, but the community doesn't believe that police department will ever investigate it thoroughly and hold people accountable. They don't think, cops investigating cops, that's crazy, right? And so what do you say, this whole process that you just laid out, and we'll get into, I have some questions about what you train, because you have this unique experience of both sides of the coin. But what do you say to the people in our community, which is a significant number of people that don't trust law enforcement because they don't think we hold people accountable and they don't think we do a thorough investigation?
Those people that you're talking about also need to adhere to the transparency or to the accountability. What I mean by that is when you make a complaint of alleged misconduct against an officer, the end result for that complainant is a letter. I would suppose a lot of agencies do that. Mm-hmm. Just a letter saying, hi, Mr. Johnson, we looked into this and we felt that it was unfounded. The cop didn't do anything wrong.
Or whatever.
Whatever the classification, the adjudication is, and you send him off that letter. But here's what I challenge. You think Mr. Johnson actually called to find out why that is? In my experience, no.
Right.
No one really, I suppose, and I don't mean to sound harsh.
And in some places, I don't know if they'd get an answer.
Some did, right.
Right.
Some places don't get an answer.
Right.
And when you do send that letter to inform on what happened, you don't care.
Right.
You don't care enough to walk in or call that number and say, you know what, can we please sit down and kind of explain to me, how is it that he's not being held accountable?
Right.
So as much as we are to be held accountable, and we'll talk about transparency, as much as transparent we want to be, well, there's two sides of the coin.
Right.
You should also care enough. The problem is that you only care when it's sensationalized. You only care when there is racial issues, or you only care when it's controversial. When someone gets shot and doesn't have, is unarmed,
Right.
God forbid they're a certain race, then you really, really pay attention. And even in those situations, right, where you have an unarmed victim, if you will, that got shot by the police, yeah, I suppose for the first 72 hours or for the first month, you're pumped up like, I can't believe you guys did that.
Right.
But if you let time go by,
Well, and I imagine there's some situations where people, they probably feel like, what's the use of me calling? Because these people are going to give me
I don't trust
they're
the
going to give
police.
me a line, and
Yeah.
they're going to tell me all this
They're gonna
BS,
placate,
and
and
I'm
they're
going to
gonna-
answer my
Right.
questions. So why even waste? I've already wasted time, obviously, because this guy's
Yes.
exonerated or whatever.
Yes.
So I know you, fortunately, I think for law enforcement and the community, you go around the country now and you do trainings. And the trainings you do are kind of also both sides of the coin, right?
Yes.
You train young officers or just officers in general, what their rights are and the process. But you also train people like in internal affairs how to do a proper, thorough investigation so you can get to a fair, accurate outcome. Again, thinking on behalf of communities that feel like a higher amount of distrust for law enforcement, I think some of them would say, "Why do you need to teach officers? What are you teaching officers their rights or things? They either did it or they didn't,
Yeah.
and they need
Good
to be
point.
held accountable when they screw up. And I don't care what rights they have. I care about the investigation on the other side, finding out whether they did it or not. So why is it important for both sides to understand their rights and those sort of things?"
I suppose for me, Chief, why it's just so important is because more often than not, I've seen officers get brought up on allegations where the end result is just that's not what happened. You know, it just didn't occur. It's unfounded, right? I don't know why the department did that, and so time and time again, it happens, and it becomes somewhat of a culture where, you know what, we're just gonna. Just go ahead and cut a face. You do an IA, and you know, and so we don't care. And I guess I'm speaking from an emotional and a very psychological, because you can be the best officer, do the right thing, and serve your community, and yet you're getting jammed up for something so minor. Which, by the way, that's not the way it went down. That's from an internal point of view. Now, from an external point of view, well, wouldn't you like to know whether or not there are officers who did the right thing? And maybe maybe that person who's complained for all the wrong reasons.
Or maybe just saw it.
Or maybe
wrong.
saw something different,
Yeah.
especially third party.
Right.
I'll give you an example. From 2011 to 2015, because when I was there, I can only speak, and don't quote me on the numbers in particulars, but over 3,000 citizen complaints in the city of Los Angeles with the LAPD. 96.4% of those come back unfounded. So what does that tell you? That tells you that people see things and they want to complain about things, and they say that these officers did this, and that, and that's not what happened.
Right.
So the problem and the challenge is that we need to have those conversations. Now, going back from the internal, is that I felt, because I've had this experience, and after 25 years, it's time to teach the next generation what your rights are. And of course, I'm very pro-police. You know, I love my community, but nowadays it's even more challenging to be a police officer.
Sure.
I mean, think about the fact that
When recruitment is at
completely
like probably
down,
all-time lows.
retention's down, hiring crisis. We do need reform. We have to train. We have a lot of challenges just in general in our profession, but you could be criminally filed on. Think about that. You can.
Sure.
You're one incident. There can be an incident where you were taught exactly what you're supposed to do, and you still are looking at criminal filings. That means that you can be incarcerated. You can be thrown in jail, and you lose everything. And so for me, we over at Savage Training Group, when Scott Savage, the founder, and I met, we designed this course, right? It's a 2-day course where we want to be able to teach officers that are actually coming up on promotion. It's a target audience, right? To sergeant, look, now that you're a sergeant, and if you have to get in an assignment as internal affairs, this is what you need to do. And you need to do it very, very good. And we're going to teach you how to do that. Then you have sergeants who probably have never done an IA.
Right. Sure.
Day 2 in our training is OIS protocols. Hey, man, you've never probably even responded to an OIS. When you go to an officer-involved shooting, this is what you need to do. And the challenge is nowadays, we law enforcement, command staff, every police department, well, I should say post, the state of California demands a lot out of you. Sure. You know, there's a lot that you have to do. And so we need to train you to ensure that when you do get into that situation, you have a good foundation as to what to do. So training is important. And we felt that there just isn't enough. There isn't enough to get out there and to teach these particular type of skill set.
Yeah, I think you mentioned earlier. Yes. You mentioned earlier, like 90% of the folks were exonerated. I think part of what you mentioned earlier with transparency is the challenge with the 96% is there's segments of our community that go, it's because you guys didn't do it right. They didn't really not do what they were accused of. You just did a, half-baked job, and because you're cops, you don't want to find them guilty. So I think that transparency is also part of that equation of how, even if that 6% is 100% accurate, there's people in the community that don't believe it. And so when they don't believe it, we still have challenges with that legitimacy and that trust. And so it's one of the reasons why I think it's so unique and great that you teach these courses both to officers, and also the people that will be investigating these accusations. Yes. Or officer-involved shootings or whatever it may be. Because just like in the criminal court system, I'm a firm believer that if the officers do something wrong in investigating that case, break the law, violate the Constitution, right, the fruit of the poisonous tree, yes, that absolutely that should be thrown out. Yes. Because our system, if we have no respect for the system, if we have no integrity in the system, then people can just start doing whatever, and then pretty soon you don't have a system. So that's why I think it's so critical that you teach officers, because they're human beings. They have families. They need to understand their rights, but also teach the other side on how to accurately do a thorough investigation. So when these are done, not only the police department, the police chief, the administration, but also the community can go, I trust that process. Yes. And the end result of that process, I trust. And if for some reason they said this person didn't do what I thought they did, then I have a higher level of trust in that than I do, say, today. And I think that's at the root of a lot of our challenges between law enforcement and the community. They just don't trust that these things are happening. They don't think cops can investigate cops. No. And from what I've seen in cities that have these review boards, it's not better, and a lot of times it's worse. I mean, I know chiefs who tried to terminate people, and the boards overturned them. Yes. So it's a lot of it has to go along with that transparency you're talking about. So talk a little bit about so you're at the college, but I know as part of taking that job, you wanted to ensure that you could continue to do this teaching. So talk a little bit about what your target audience is for the trainings you do, and and I want to get to your podcast kind of stuff that you're doing on these other cases too. But talk a little bit about who you teach to, what kind of organizations, and how they can get in touch with you if they need that sort of training. Okay, so what we're luckily, blessed to God, we're pretty booked up from now until the end of the year. I think the farthest You're still
class
taking
we get
phone
out.
calls though, right?
I'll take phone calls all the time for sure, not a problem. We even do privates, where basically we go to Savage Training Group website. Okay. And you click down, you look at internal affairs, you'll see my my bio, my partner's bio, and click into if you want to host it or if you want a private, let us know and we'll work from there. one of the things that we definitely want to ensure is that the majority of students are going to be sergeants, even some lieutenants, because you're going to have part of my the curriculum. What I teach is there's this portion where I teach about presentations. In other words, you're a sergeant in a small agency, and you're not going to have, maybe one day your captain's not going to be there, or your lieutenant's not going to be there, and the chief just walks around and says, "Hey, Marlon, what's going on with that case? And is it done? 1, 2, okay, tell them what you got. Is it unfounded or is it sustained? And if it is, let me know." So you're gonna have to brief them and present them. So that's part. So we want young command staff or lieutenants. I also would like to have these young officers that are getting ready for promotion, because they also need to know that once you become a sergeant,
coming out of the academy, training, and
you know, that would be great. I think at one point in LEPD, I did kind of tap the door of, hey, you know, do we go into the academy and let them know about Peace Officers Bill of Rights? And it's not covered. It's not done much.
That's probably the last thing.
It's a lot. Yeah, they're like, they don't want to hear that stuff. Get out and do some work. Because let's be honest, everything that I teach, it's challenging. It's not sexy. Sure. It's not popular, you know, and it can get kind of boring. But, you know, we try to make it very engaging. There is no death by PowerPoint, or else I would have never gotten hired. There is no lecturing, or else I never got hired. There's a lot of engagement. We're there to have this conversation, especially now, as you may know, is Senate Bill 2. Part of my class is SB 2, and that's a whole different conversation. And if, for the audience out there, there's a Senate bill that came out in December of this year. I'm sorry, January of this year, where depending on the type of allegations, and here's the kicker, the lawmakers said, we just want the allegations. We don't care if they're how they got adjudicated. We just want these particular, what they call serious allegations, is what we call the 9 deadly sins. There's 9 of them. And if it's one of those 9, you got to give us a call. And you give us a call, we're going to review it as well, because there's a possibility that you're going to get decertified. In other words, we're going to take your license from you. Right. And so that whole process, no one knows about. I'm not too familiar with it. And so we need to have that conversation, right? Because they're building it, you know. So that's what we're doing with Savage Training Group. I'm so blessed, but at the same time, I'm available for phone calls for someone to call me and say, "Hey, I got this IA, and hey, Marlon, take a look at this and see if we're, you know, if this is right or wrong." I suppose. So
I'm curious about with somebody with your experience, again with representing officers and also investigating officers. Because I know what I think about as a police chief when I see stuff like this. So I'm curious what, like, are the first things that came to your mind when you saw things like, let's just take the Memphis incident where those officers were. So I know what, you know, early on when I'm watching the first couple of days when these videos are coming out and I'm seeing it, besides the fact of how disgusting that was of what they were doing. But like, I know where my mind went as a police chief. I'm curious what were like your concerns and the things that you thought about when you first saw it with somebody with your experience on both sides of that.
Very, very good question. I would say that when I first saw that, the first thing I thought was, these guys aren't even cops, man. This is culture. This is culture. And what happens is that it's what we call organizational culture, AKA cop culture. It's cop culture, right? Because I'm a true believer that culture will always dictate what you do. In some cases, any organization, in some cases, what you don't do. Right. And by the way, it's not just law enforcement. That happens in a lot of professions, nurses, doctors, architects, lawyers, you name it. Yep. There's certain culture that you used to. And so when a buddy of mine calls me and says, "Hey, Marlon, man, I saw this Memphis thing. What do you think? Do you think what happened?" And I thought to myself, okay, hold on a second. First of all, it's almost like a little bit of an insult for me to even give you an analysis just from what I saw. Mm-hmm. And this is what I mean by that. The first thing in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, come on. Let's not talk about what's not. Oh, this has got to be training. This has got to be reform, right? Maybe the standards of hiring are low. You know, let's have those conversations.
It's funny you said training, because I'm like, I'm pretty sure weren't trained to do that.
Right. So then the first thing I thought to myself, then came out on one of my buddies' podcasts. He was a host. I said, look, there is not, and I might be wrong, but there's not one instructor in any police academy in the entire United States that says, okay, class, today, this is what we're going to do. We're going to handcuff your partner, and I want you to go ahead and just strike him across the head. I mean, come on. Right. Let's keep it real here. Let's simplify it and not make it so complex and use these big words where we think that all these lawmakers and all these experts that say, oh, you know what, we need to reform. No, what you need to do is to look into the culture, because here's the deal.
Culture that could say that's okay.
Turning a blind eye and turning that cheek, just like the Bible says, you know what, there is forgiveness, but in this case, no. Don't sit here and tell me that those 4 officers or that whole unit, you think that's the first time they did something like that? Absolutely not. It's not an aberration. So what I say when I see something like that is, look, from the top all the way down, you are to be held accountable. You are the one that are responsible for changing that culture, because if them dudes are doing that, just that right there, I got to tell you, they've done it way more than once. And we can talk about the Schaffen, you know, what happened to me, same thing. 19 years, and you think that's the first time he actually put a knee to someone's neck?
Right.
That's not the way it works. Well, so I'm always a big believer of having conversations about how can we change culture, because you're the chief. Sometimes chiefs act like, well, you know, I'm in a big agency. I really don't know anything that's going on. I'll leave it up to my command staff to tell me. Especially with smaller agencies, you can't really use that much of an excuse. One, and ignorance is never an excuse, if you know what I mean.
Well, it's so interesting you say that, because the first things I thought when I saw the first videos was, where were there? I didn't see one supervisor anywhere. How many of those people had the opportunity to step in and prevent that from continuing? And then the very next thing, which you just touched on, I told my wife this when we were, one of the times we were together when it came on the news, and I'm like, there's no way that's the first time they did something like that. Is so egregious.
Yes.
That they didn't start there. They start, and so I was thinking, if I was chief, I'd be pulling every one of their body cameras for the last however many years they were on and looking at, because I guarantee you'll find more. And so it's interesting that you have those, with your experience, you had those same sort of thoughts when you saw it. And it's those kind of, you know, everybody's trying to search out, how do we get to a point where we don't see some of the videos we see on TV with law enforcement? And a lot of it, and you touched on it, said people will say training and
reform.
It's bigger than any one thing, right?
Correct.
You can train people the right way, but if your culture allows a different way, then the training's going to go by the wayside and the culture is going to win. Absolutely.
And Chief, what are we really talking about is, the other thing that I think about is, okay, I used to say this, but I've been corrected. I used to say 1,800 agencies in the United States. It's not. There's 18,000. Don't quote me on that number. I think we got to look it up, but I know it's
somewhere around there.
18,000 law enforcement agencies in the United States. We have a lot of work to do. I say that because you've never heard of Minneapolis. You've never heard of Kenosha. You never heard of Ferguson. You never heard of
until
something happens. So right. What does that tell you? What it tells you is that there's a certain culture in a lot of these pockets of agencies where this is the way we do business.
Right.
This is the way we do police work. And you know what? We're not going to tolerate that. We're not having it. And in this particular case, we talked about the Memphis incident, you got to go. As a matter of fact, everybody's got to go. But here's the deal. We did learn. There is some lessons learned, good ones for that matter, is because she did say, okay, before I even make this public, I'm going to get rid of them, and we're going to file criminal charges.
And I think you saw the results. They didn't have the level of protest that you've had in other cities.
Exactly.
Because, again, it goes back to the community that looks at this. So the incident's one thing, but how you deal with it is what is driving a lot of people's anger. Is they don't think
absolutely
you're doing, and what they saw there was, oh, she's doing something.
Yes.
So therefore, they still had protests, but not to the level of what you saw in other states. So last question I want to ask you.
Yes.
You're working on a pretty unique project, I believe, that I think started out maybe as a podcast, but you're also reaching out to production companies and things.
Yes.
So talk about that a little bit.
Okay. So because of me rolling out to all these OISs, right, being there, I believe it's AB 1421, right? So there's this assembly bill that says, hey, listen, police department, you have to, within a certain amount of days, you got to get it out to the media.
Yep.
About what happened.
Ours is posted on the website to this day.
You're right.
The whole report. I never would have thought such a thing when I was a young officer.
Right. So in 2000, I want to say the birth of this was around 2017. And so from 2017 to present, each department, especially here in California, you better tell the public.
Yep.
But here's the deal. When we tell the public, we do a good job. Don't get me wrong. You have the command staff officer, hey, you know, I'm going to tell you today about this incident. There was a radio call. My officers responded. And this is what happened. They engaged in deadly force. I'll slow down the body-worn video. I'll show you the weapon. I'll show you a little bit of the facts of the case. But that's it. What happens after that? You want to talk about accountability or the community. The community doesn't know. What's the outcome? You don't know, A, what the officers go through, B, what the victim went through, right? You don't know the outcome. You don't know if it was an in-policy shooting or out-of-policy shooting. What can we learn from this?
Right.
But we don't do that. So the light bulb hit when I was trying to do a podcast to talk about these OISs. So my original idea was I'm just going to go on YouTube and pick up a couple of OISs and just break them down and, you know, talk about it. But then I got a little smart. I said, okay, I picked my co-host, who is a Latina reporter in the local news, and she's very good at what she does. She's been doing this for 10 years. And when I told her about the idea, I go, look, I want to break down these OISs. What do you think? She's all, I think this is a fabulous idea. And so her and I were looking, okay, we got to get lights. We got to get cameras. No different than our beloved Jesse here that's doing for us, right? So we had to get this whole setup. So I'm thinking, all right, I got to buy mics and cameras and lighting. So then my sister, who's a private chef out in Henderson, told me, hey, I have a client out in Pasadena. Go check him out. He's got a studio. And so I go there. This guy owns a studio. He produces, and he goes, I go, okay, this looks great. How much is this going to cost me? He goes, it's not going to cost you nothing. I want in partnership 50-50, because here's what we're going to do. You're going to do your thing. I'm going to give you everything, because what we're going to do is, you're thinking YouTube, we want to go to the networks, because what you're trying to do, or you're attempting to do, that it's going to happen, it's going to hit, because it's never been done before. And so I brought in guests that were involved in OISs. And you
guys have already filmed some stuff.
We've done 12 episodes. We finished last November. Right now we're in we're in production. So the idea is to film one episode. Actually, let me back up.
Would that be with body camera footage and all that kind of stuff too?
So, what I try to do, Chief, is a lot of my guests that told about their OISs was pre-body worn.
Oh,
okay. So what he did tell me is like, I want to do reenactments. I'm like, okay, but that's going to cost. You got to get permits. You got to do this, this, and that. And he goes, don't worry about a thing. I'll take care of all that. You just make sure you get the guests here. Okay. So we're going to reenact one episode, one of the best 12. And I can't even pick my favorite, because all 12 are just phenomenal stories. We'll go into production into that. We're going to be shooting hopefully this month, maybe next month. And once we have that done, we'll grab that deck and then we go visit.
Shop it to the...
Right, and try to license it out.
So somebody could see it on, say, like a Netflix or something
Netflix,
like that.
Hulu's, the Tubies, whoever. And they'll say, this is great. How many episodes you have? Well, I got 11 left. All right, cool. You know what? Let's negotiate. You know, I'll break you some bread, but we're going to get it. So that's where we're at right now.
Cool. So I don't want to leave here today without you saying how, if somebody that's listening to this wants you to come in and train their agency, or, their college, their whatever it might be? How do they get in touch with you, and how do they
Well,
go
first
about
of all, let's see. So I just I'm working my domain. I'm working on my website now. The first thing I need, my email address is Marlon, Marlon, at blueconsultingincorporated.com. So
Okay.
Blue Consulting Inc., INC, Blue, BLU Consulting Inc., altogether.com. So you can get a hold of me there. You're more than welcome to come to LinkedIn. And or you can go to my Instagram, which is Marlon_Marrache is my name. That's where you can get a hold of me. Love doing this stuff. As you can tell, it's something that it's needed. We have a lot of work to do. And before we wrap it up, you really brought up a good point about the community, which is so important about all this that we always seem to forget is if I was king for a day or a chief for a day, I would love to sit down with someone who did get a complaint, of alleged misconduct, and it came back unfounded. And we can have a conversation, me being the IO, and say, look, sir, ma'am, let me tell you what I did for this particular case. This is what I did. I got a hold of, I called you 3 times. I canvassed the area. I went to go talk to witnesses. I took this. I did pictures.
Right.
I did everything that I can. No stone went unturned to get to this.
Right.
And you weren't available. I tried to call you like 5. Who knows? I'm just giving you an example, but that's what we need, and we're heading in the right direction.
Well, and I know I've been with groups of chiefs that have recommended things in the past too, because I think part of the issues is the rules and the laws a lot of times prevent a lot of those kind of conversations, whether they be with the community or with your staff that were involved in those sort of things, right? Or witnesses and things like that. So oftentimes what happens in a department is the officers are, oh man, Billy's getting railroaded.
Yes.
Well, and you're thinking, I wish I could tell them
right
what happened and what we know, or I wish I could tell this community instead of just that letter. I wish I could go into details. And even to this day, only some kind of complaints can you do that. But at the same point, there has to be a happy balance with the officers' rights of privacy, because they're not separate kind of human beings. They're human beings too, and they have families, and all too often they're getting threatened these days too. So I think, one of the things we had recommended is if an officer does get terminated and has gone through all their process, so it's final, that their stuff can be released because, you really have to do something to get terminated and go through the appeals process. So I think there's room to still grow as long as it's a collaborative effort to how do we build legitimacy?
Yes.
Because right now we're in some challenging times.
Yes.
When you have law enforcement that's such an important role in our society.
Yes.
That is viewed by large segments of our society as not legitimate and lacks trust. That's a problem that I don't know that we all fully realize where that can go if it continues.
It's got a big impact. And I will only say that, when Billy is getting railroaded, and this is one of the things I like to teach and to tell, is that, look, culture will tell you that I can't talk to Billy.
Right.
But what you can do is tell Billy, hey, listen, you know what? John's got the case. Hopefully he'll wrap it up in 3 weeks. And in 3 weeks, I'm going to go ahead and take it to brief command staff on it.
Right.
And if it doesn't happen those 3 weeks, then call Billy back again and say, hey, you know what?
Right.
We weren't able to meet. What I'm saying is that communicate and let him know. You don't have to tell him so you don't violate their rights. But what you can do is hold his or her hand and walk him through the process, regardless of the outcome. Right. And I think that's the part where IA gets a bad rap.
I mean, part of the problem historically is it's a mystery for everybody.
It's a
mystery for the community.
Yes.
It's a mystery for the officers involved. And it's truly a mystery for the rest of the department that don't have a right to know some of these things. So, where there's a void of information, people fill it in with whatever they want. So, hey, man, I really appreciate your time and your expertise. And I'm very happy that you're sharing that with agencies around the country, because this whole process of accountability, if you will, is critical to the trust in our community, the trust within our own departments. So thank you for all that you continue to do,
Thank you.
even though you're retired.
Yeah.
You're supposed to have a nice, relaxing life now. Instead, you're traveling all over the place.
I do. And you know what? Part of it, what I will say is that I worked so hard for 20 years, all this overtime. I was one of those, had to depend on supplemental income. And just to know that I get weekends off, I get to spend it, play and have some fun and do this. Life is great. And I want to thank you for allowing me to be in your podcast. It's not many times you get to talk to a retired chief. This is my first, and I truly 100% appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. One of the big purposes of A Way Forward is to hear different voices and different opinions, because that is how we can make informed decisions ourselves. So if you are someone that would like to come on A Way Forward to express your opinion, go to chiefhahn.com/podcast. Chief, HAHN.com/podcast.